Welcome to the Sound of Ideas from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Stephanie Haney. Thank you for being with us. For many people, death is a taboo topic. It can feel uncomfortable, even controversial, and it's something people often avoid until they no longer can. But experts say making space to talk about death can bring a surprising sense of relief and connection. So, how do we face our fear of death, demystify it, and get more comfortable speaking honestly about it? In recent years, death cafes have emerged as informal gatherings, often in bars or coffee shops, where people come together simply to talk about mortality. Today, we'll hear from the Cleveland Death Society, a group which hosts these open, agenda free conversations about loss and end of life experiences. And it's a timely moment for this conversation. For many, the winter holiday season can intensify feelings of grief and make them harder to navigate. Later in the show, I'll talk with Jeff Epstein, the new president and CEO of the Port of Cleveland. Joining me now for this discussion on the concept of death, we have Brandy Lynn Wiles, founder of the Cleveland Death Society. Hi, Brandy. Thanks for being here.
Hello, thanks for having me.
On the phone, we also have Dr. Kimberly Garcher, an associate professor of philosophy at Kent State University. Hi, Kim. Thanks for being with us.
Hi, good morning. Again, thank you for having me.
And we also have Dr. Gabriela Gomez. She's a resident physician with the Harvard Radiation Oncology Program. Hi, Gabriela. Great to have you with us.
Good morning. Thank you so much.
Now, if you would like to join this conversation, if you have a comment or question or a thought you'd like to share, you can give us a call. That number is 866-578-0903. You can also send us an email at soi@ideastream.org, or you can send us a message on Instagram at The Sound of Ideas. Brandy, can you talk to us about the first Death Cafe that you hosted and how that led to founding the Cleveland Death Society?
Yeah, it actually started when I attended my first Death Cafe. I had no idea really what it was. The event page was kind of vague, but I went, and there was about maybe 12 people. The gentleman that hosted it decided it just wasn't something he had the time for, and he had reached out to me, and he was like, "Hey, you're into death. You're good at organizing. Would you want to host the next Death Cafe?" And I thought, yeah, that can't be hard. Oh man. It started at no class, thanks to Emma Jockum. She's amazing. We put together the Death Cafe. I took in cake, and we had coffee, we had munchies, and I thought, there's only going to be a dozen people to show up, right? There were 33 people, and I was like, oh my gosh, there are a lot of people here. I introduced myself and what a Death Cafe was, that it kind of leads itself in discussion, and that it is an open space for people to openly talk about death, their curiosity with it, and to kind of connect. After the first Death Cafe, I had gotten an email back from the bar owner, and she was like, yeah, so people really want to know when the next one is. They're asking for your email, how to contact you. Is there a group page? It grew into something that I had no control over, because it was something that was needed and just wasn't out there.
What is your membership like, Brandy, for the Cleveland Death Society? Is it a lot of people who are experiencing the loss of others? Is it people who are maybe looking at their impending death?
I mean, it's both. It is a lot of, I wish I had these discussions with my children when they were younger. It is, I'm getting older, my pets are dying. It is, I have a fascination with cemeteries and the macabre, and I don't want to feel weird when I talk to people about it. It is also EMTs, hospice nurses, other doulas, conversing and getting to talk to each other in a safe space where normally society doesn't always want to hear these conversations out in the open, and they always make us feel as though we're not even supposed to talk about death, dying, loss, grief, which one of the things in the Cleveland Deaf Society that we all agree on is Not doing that damages us as a society. So it's free to be a member. It's all my events are free, and we just want people that are grieving, actively dying, have questions. It's a space for them to openly find those resources within the community so that they don't have to keep hitting wall after wall where they don't know where to go for support or even just a focused group of interest.
Now, Gabriella, you're an oncologist, and you and your colleagues conducted a study published in the American Journal of Geriatric Psychiatry that found a positive correlation between students and physicians who attended death cafes and feeling more comfortable talking about death and dying. Can you tell us more about that research?
Absolutely. We created a virtual death cafe for medical and nursing trainees and faculty at an academic medical center. And it's just an informal platform for open dialogue about death and dying. And our goal was to create space for end of life discussion with the understanding that the comfort of healthcare providers with having these conversations can have meaningful impact on the patient provider relationship, but also on patient outcomes. And what we found was really encouraging. A vast majority of the trainees who attended reported that the experience made them feel more comfortable talking about death and dying, and that it changed the way they approach end of life conversations. Importantly, a vast majority said the experience exposed them to perspectives very different from their own. And one thing in particular really stood out to us, which was that only about a third of the trainees felt that their education had prepared them well to talk about death professionally. So I think that the implications for medical education are significant. I think our study supports the principle that integrating death cafe style discussions can address gaps in traditional medical curricula, both by normalizing conversations about death and reducing emotional barriers to these conversations. But I think the implications for patient care are also significant. You know, these interventions may ultimately lead to clinicians who are more comfortable and skilled in end of life communication, which is associated with improved patient centered care, better alignment of care with patient values, and in some cases, this may even impact patient longevity.
Kimberly, I'll ask you from a philosophical perspective. How can our thoughts and feelings around death shape how we choose to live our life?
Well, I think that there are two things to consider there. Well, minimally two. But one, we could go all the way back to the ancient Greeks, and Epicurus said, the art of living well and dying well are one.
Mm.
And the idea would be that you live your life such that your death will be, um, uh, if not welcome, a good event, right? So this reminder of mortality or finitude actually guides your direction and your decision making. And then the much more recent idea is one is from Camus, French existentialist philosopher, who very famously opened an essay by asking the question: the only real philosophical question that we have is why we don't commit suicide. And his response was, of course, incredibly um, hopeful and positive, although the question itself tends to have negative connotations. We tend to recoil when we hear a question like that. And he said, "No, this is what we embrace the fact that we have only so much time, and we are going to live a life passionately and joyfully in the face of this mortality."
We have an email now from Stephen. Stephen writes, I became aware of death positivity years ago and have no qualms about death myself. But what gives me apprehension is bringing it up to my out of state 82-year-old dad, whom I don't see very often.
Hmm.
I assume it will be uncomfortable for him, and anytime I do see him is an occasion that doesn't seem appropriate. So I'll return to you on this question, Kimberly. From a philosophical perspective here, how do we sort of try to understand when it is appropriate to have conversations about death? Is there a time that is, and is there a time that isn't?
I don't know that there's a particular time, but I think the question raised by this person is central to so many people because we have not normalized discussing death, as Brandy can has attested to, and Gabriella too. We don't know how to do this. And so that initial conversation, I have to say, will probably be uncomfortable, but we have to habitually return to this concept if we are going to, in any way, have meaningful conversations about what one wants at the end of life, what one hopes will happen at the end of life. We have to be able to discuss these things. And I will just say, as a professor, when I teach my healthcare ethics students, and we reach the death and dying portion of the class, and I ask them, how many people have discussed what you want at end of life with your loved ones? Typically, no one raises their hand. Now, admittedly, these are young people, right? These are 20-year-olds. These are 22-year-olds. But you actually have to start early. These conversations can start with, oh, you got your driver's license. Do you want to be an organ donor? How would you like to see that happen? So we can sort of start in small ways, but unfortunately, I don't have a fix-all for exactly the right time. It's just going to be uncomfortable the first time. You're going to have to sit down and say, okay, look, we have to plan for this. And it's important that I know what you want so that I can honor what you want, even if you're unable to say that yourself in the future.
I think it raises an interesting question. It can be uncomfortable being someone who's younger and seems farther away from death, even though we have no idea how that moment will come. It could come very quickly and unexpectedly for anyone of any age. But it seems to be something that is a little bit trickier to bring up to someone who seems to be closer to death. And it's almost, putting the onus on that person who seems to be closer to death to bring that up. It's a very complicated question. Brandy, I'll return to you now. Is there a particular event or experience that shaped how you think about death and made you view it in such an accessible way?
Oh yeah. Death was always openly discussed growing up from I mean, I remember my first funeral, I believe I was maybe 5. Within my family and my culture, we openly talk about death. We memorialize. But I would say that when I was around 6 or 7, I was staying the night at my auntie's, and she had not felt well that week. I woke up in the middle of the night to her gasping and falling down on the kitchen floor. I passed out. I was taken to the hospital, so was she, and I was right next to her when she went. And I can still remember the sounds and the smell of the hospital because the lady that was in the room, because there was just a curtain between us. The nurse that was with me smelled like hot cocoa. And it just stuck out in my mind when I had went to her funeral. Her name is Helen. When I went to Helen's funeral, I couldn't get out of the car. I couldn't move. And my mother had come up to me and she said, death is hard and it really sucks that you have to go through this so young. But I think that she would want you to come out and at least say goodbye. So I had gone into the funeral home and my grandmother was standing there, and my grandma was a jokester. So I walk up to the casket and I look at Helen and I look at my grandma and I'm like, why does she have her glasses on?
Fair question. Sure.
And my grandmother goes, well, yeah. And I'm a little kid and I'm like upset and I'm like, she's dead. She can't see. Like, what is she going to read? And my grandma goes, well, we'll just take them off. And she leans over and she goes, here, take them off. And she takes them off and she sticks them in her pocket. And this lady next to my grandmother just looks mortified, like, oh my God. And my grandmother, my grandmother was like, do you feel better? And I go, no, but it, I just don't know why they put her glasses on her. Funeral homes are silly. And then this woman that was standing nearby, who was appalled by my grandmother's actions and me giggling that this woman had just taken glasses off this corpse, she goes, well, she's wanted somewhere and she's needed elsewhere, and that's why she's gone. And I just remember looking at the lady thinking, what about me? What about all of her friends? I had a lot of questions. That moment on, I was very aware of how quickly we can go, how fragile death is, how uncomfortable it makes people, how it's also okay to laugh and joke in those moments because it's healing for us grievers. Not everyone grieves and heals the same way, and not everyone is going to view death the same way either. So just from a young age, it's just been in my life. It's been there, and that was just the moment that just changed me and woke me up to see how I was just this little person, but death was so big. And death is beautiful and it's fragile, and so is life. So I've kind of just walked with that, and I've kept that close within me to this day forward.
Thank you for sharing that story with us, Brandy. Gabriella, I would like to ask you as well. Was there a personal experience that you had that shaped the way you interact with patients and your approach and maybe your decision to do the research that you did?
I think in my professional experience, discussions about death often occur at times of acute stress, following a serious diagnosis or during a rapid decline. Emotions are high, decisions about shifting goals of care are urgent, and many times in my experience, this occurs in the ICU when the individual who is at the end of life can't even participate in the decision making. And, these are intense emotional moments. So I recognized a need to have protected space for reflection on mortality outside of crisis. We need to give each other permission to explore our values and our feelings about mortality proactively rather than reactively. And I learned, talking about death will not make it come sooner, but it will help us better understand each other and care for each other.
I want to remind our audience that we are talking about death and we're talking about destigmatizing conversations around it and some groups that are working to do that here in the Northeast Ohio area and beyond. If you have a comment or a question, you can call us at 866 578 0903. You can also email us at soi@ideastream.org. Brandy, you're also a death doula. Tell us more about that.
Um, I I took a step back from my previous career and decided that it was probably a good idea to spend money on some sort of different education. And a friend of mine said, "You should be a deaf doula." And I was like, "What's that?" And she explained to me the work that she had done. She works mostly with the elderly. I started out volunteering at animal shelters and sitting with animals that were going to be euthanized. Not a lot of people know that those animals are completely alone. When you have your pet euthanized and you don't go with them because you feel you can't handle it, you just left your best friend to die alone. A lot of people I work with are pet grievers and their pets. We've hosted funerals for their pets. Their pets have passed it home to where their other pets can see them, smell them, be aware that they have gone. Their children have been there. We have wrapped their pets. We have given them burials. I have helped them find other ways to memorialize their pets, from ashes blown into glass, all kinds of fun stuff. Pet animals just kind of fell into my lap with this. I love working with people. I think the people that I work with the most are the society's outcasts, the misfits, people that you wouldn't normally think would want to have. I'm trying to think of the words to say. People that society normally outcasts, punk rockers, the LGBTQ community, goths, the emos, the most eccentric, are the ones that tend to flock to me that I work with. They tend to fill the seats at events that we host. They're more open to talking about what they want and how they want their funerals to be sought out because of their individuality. They don't want someone coming in and mucking up, their last goodbye. Your death is yours. You need someone to walk with you. It's not just sitting with someone, it's also helping them with meds, talking to doctors, talking to hospice nurses. And the work doesn't end when they pass. That's when some of the real work begins. That's when you help and work with the family. You help them learn to merge and move on. You help them understand their own impending doom. And you kind of build this family and community with them so that they know that if something were to happen or they need you, they can contact you. Deaf doulas aren't horrible people. I know that some of them, especially some of the funeral industry, looks at us as if we're a form of a threat, but we're not, because they don't want us to educate the society that you can pass it home. You can be buried on your own properly. Your family most certainly can wash you. They can wrap you in a shroud, have dinner while you're there. We have eco-friendly cemeteries here in Ohio. We have options, and that's one of the jobs of a death doula is to tell you of these options. And there are caring, loving funeral homes that do work with deaf doulas that want you to have these options. It's just finding who works right for you and where your bond is, because it's a lot of work. It's not just days. It can be months. It can be weeks.
Sure.
It's and you befriend these people and you miss them. These are some of the closest ties with people I've ever had in my whole life, and it's such an honor to be there.
Thank you for telling us about that and breaking that down for us, Brandy. I want to remind people again, we are talking about death and loss and how to destigmatize it and make those conversations more comfortable for everyone involved. The number to call in is 866-578-0903 if you have a comment or a question. You can also email us at soi@ideastream.org. We have an email now from Marvin, and I'll direct this question toward Kim. Marvin asks, any suggestions on how to bring up the topic of death with older parents for someone who has been avoiding it due to primarily no longer sharing their religion? So differences in religion there, and wondering how to still be able to bring up the topic of death. Kim.
Yeah, that's actually a huge question. And again, unfortunately, I don't have an easy answer. But one of the ways that we can think about religious differences are differences in worldview and differences in metaphysical beliefs. So, religious differences where person A believes X, and person B believes Y. Those might be addressable by starting with basic conversations, and this will sound silly, but basic conversations about what they believe death to be. So, in a highly medicalized society like the United States, we use a particular definition of death. And most hospitals in the United States, I think all, use two definitions. It's either cardiopulmonary death, where you've got cessation of cardiopulmonary activities, or whole brain death, where you have cessation of all brain activities. But maybe a way to enter these conversations is to pull them down from that religious aspect, which is so personal, to, well, how how do you think, what does it mean when you die? How will we know when you die? What do you want us to be paying attention to? Do you want us to be paying attention to your body and the fact that your body is still being sustained um, on life sustaining treatment? Or do you want us to pay attention to perhaps they think of or center the soul and whether the soul still resides in the body? Or do you want us to pay attention to your consciousness, your personality? What do you want us to pay attention to? And so it might be helpful to move back a step from the religious, and you can still get at those key differences, where you're going afterwards, if you're going anywhere. But perhaps moving it back into just, what does it look like for you? What do you want us to do as you're dying? How should we treat you? And yeah, I think maybe both Gabriella and Brandy can speak more to that. But that to me is perhaps one of the tricks. It's not a trick, but it's a way um, to stabilize a conversation that can otherwise sort of be very emotional and go off the rails quickly.
Gabriella, I want to ask you about your medical training and if there is a particular part of your medical training where you're instructed on how to deliver a terminal diagnosis and what that looks like, and if that approach is any different, how you treat it differently, whether you're dealing with an adult or maybe a child or a teen.
I think that there's been a shifting movement in medical training programs to include more training on serious illness conversation. I think probably the hardest part of having these conversations is how diverse the perspectives are on death and dying, and shifting the goals of the conversation, the dynamics of the conversation to the context at hand, whether that be age, religious beliefs, spirituality. But I think, kind of as Kim was saying, focusing on framing the conversation around the individual, what matters to them, and focusing on living in alignment with those values now. I think that's a great framework to have universally when having these conversations in a clinical setting. And I'll say it's challenging from the perspective of especially a cancer care provider, because bringing up death and mortality in a conversation with patients can feel like you're letting them down or you're abandoning them. And some patients won't even let you bring up death because they want to, quote unquote, stay positive, or they don't want to give up hope. But talking about death doesn't have to diminish hope. I think it can actually shift our focus towards what makes life for the individual in front of you meaningful.
We have a couple minutes left for this conversation, so I'll read this email from John, and then I'll invite our panel to share their wishes for end of life. John writes, "The primary takeaway from a death seminar I attended at my church was, be sure you tell someone, anyone, about your final wishes. If you keep them to yourself, no one will know how you envisioned and preferred your transition to the next plane of existence." John, thank you for sharing that. And I will ask Brandy to start. Brandy, what are your final wishes?
My final wishes, we actually have a workbook in the house that I am filling all of my final wishes and stuff for, because I don't want to leave that burden or debt on my kids. That's the first thing. My children know that if possible, I want to pass it home. If not, bring me home. They will wash my body. There will be a dinner. The men in our family will keep a fire going for 4 days as per our tradition, and I will be taken up and I will be placed next to my grandmother in the Appalachian Mountains with the rest of my family while my children get to explore the mountains for 3 days and reconnect with their ancestry.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Brandy. Kim, would you like to share?
Sure. I really would like to emphasize some of the environmentally friendly options that we have now. Personally, me, I would like to be cremated and planted with a tree, or have my ashes spread somewhere like a pasture or something like that. So I'm very focused on honoring the person. Hopefully, my friends do that and my family, honoring the person. And I have fewer family traditions about what is done with my body, but I completely respect and honor any tradition that has those kinds of prescriptions,
Mm-hmm.
because I think one of the things missing from our discussion, not this discussion, but our social discussion, is how to honor the dead, and what kinds of rituals do we want, and how do we memorialize specifically.
Mm-hmm.
So
Thank you, Kim. Thank you for sharing that. Gabriella, how about you?
I think I've learned to appreciate how little control I may very well have over the circumstances of my end of life. That I may not have control. I may not be able to decide where that happens, whether that happens at home, surrounded by family. So I think my wishes include clarity among the people I love and peace among the people I love.
Thank you very much, Gabriella. I want to thank our panel for participating in this conversation today. Dr. Gabriela Gomez, resident physician at the Harvard Radiation Oncology Program. Also, Dr. Kimberly Garcher, associate professor of philosophy at Kent State University, and Brandy Lynn Wiles, founder of the Cleveland Death Society. Thanks to each of you for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
you're welcome.
All right, we'll take a quick break now, and when we come back, we'll meet the new president and CEO of the Port of Cleveland, Jeff Epstein. This is The Sound of Ideas. I'm Stephanie Haney. We'll be right back. You're with The Sound of Ideas from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Stephanie Haney. Thank you for staying with us. The Port of Cleveland is a major economic driver of the region, supporting some 23,000 jobs and contributing more than $4.7 billion to the Northeast Ohio economy annually. The port's influence reaches far beyond just the things that are being transported through docks on the lakefront. They're involved in financing large housing projects, environmental endeavors, and reshaping the banks of the Cuyahoga River. And now the port has new leadership, as former CEO Will Friedman stepped away from the job after 14 years. With me in studio to talk about his role is the new president and CEO of the Port of Cleveland, Jeff Epstein. Jeff, welcome back to The Sound of Ideas.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Now, if you would like to join this conversation, you can give us a call. That number is 866-578-0903. You can also send us an email at soi@ideastream.org or send us a message on Instagram at The Sound of Ideas. Now, Jeff, you spent the last few years in Cleveland Mayor Justin Bibb's administration. You were the chief of integrated development for the city of Cleveland. What was it that made you want to move to this new role?
Really, it was an opportunity to continue doing the work that I was doing at City Hall, just from a different vantage point, and continue advancing some of the critical items that are on Mayor Bibb's agenda, on County Executive Renane's agenda, but just with different tools and a different organization.
What's it been like stepping into this role after the predecessor had been there for such a long amount of time? 14 years is a long time to be leading an organization.
Yeah, it's a tremendous opportunity. It's a really good organization that has had tremendous impact, has a really talented, dedicated staff. And I talked to everybody about this as an opportunity to really go from good to great. I think Will did an incredible job of building up our maritime business, making critical investments in the port, stewarding the Irishtown Bend project. Now I think it's really an opportunity for us to think about how we can use some of our development finance tools to advance critical regional priorities, how we can continue to focus on the impact of the port on people in Northeast Ohio, on jobs, on quality of life, on strengthening our economy, and getting us towards growth.
Let's talk about the economy a bit here and the port and what it means for the region of Northeast Ohio. President Donald Trump's tariffs that are in place right now, they've grabbed a lot of attention this year. So what's been your experience in terms of how the tariffs are impacting the shipping industry coming through Northeast Ohio?
The tariffs have definitely been a little bit of a challenge. We are down in cargo this year. Same number of ships, just less stuff coming on them. We're hoping that will recover. But broadly speaking, a lot of our traffic is within the United States, bringing in iron ore from the Northern Great Lakes to support Cleveland Cliffs. That traffic is up. And we certainly hope to be able to steer through these tariffs and continue back on a growth trajectory again.
Let's talk about some of the things that the port is involved in that may be lesser known to people. Some of the specific projects involved with include the Warner and Swayze building in Cleveland's Midtown neighborhood and the Westinghouse project in Detroit Shoreway. So can you tell us how the port's involved there?
Yeah, ports under Ohio law have a lot of really unique financing tools to help development projects. We have bond structures and capital lease structures that can help with lower rate financing, with filling gaps on projects. And so we're going to do probably about a dozen projects this year, totaling close to $300 million of bonds. And those are tools that I think we can use a lot more proactively to think about how can we deploy those tools to help advance the efforts around Site Readiness Fund and getting clean sites for factories to relocate and onshore in Cleveland. How can we use those to advance and solve our housing crisis? So these are great tools that we want to make more available. We want to be out more. We want to be more proactive with, but we're really excited about the impact we've had and will continue to have.
Has that always been a part of the port's mission, financing other projects?
Always been a part of the port's mission.
Daryl in Euclid emails in and says, first, congratulations, Jeff.
Thank you, Daryl.
And then asks, what are some of the criteria for the projects that the port gets involved with? He's specifically asking about the Burke Airport redevelopment and the Haslam Brook Park project, but in general and related to those things.
Yeah, we're really looking for positive impact on the community. How does it help us solve our problems? How do projects help us grow? We're evaluating each project individually to make sure it's financially feasible. With respect to Burke, that is certainly a project that we expect to be engaged in. Part of what the port does as well is to help keep our federal shipping channel moving on the Cuyahoga River. And so we work closely with the Army Corps that dredges the river. They have to, when the ships come through with their propellers, it kicks loose a lot of silt. And if nothing is done, that will gradually build up and ships can't get through the river. So we, with respect to Burke, have dredge placement facilities out off the coast of Burke Airport where we store that dredge material. And so I expect we'll be engaged and supportive of the efforts to close Burke.
Okay. I want to remind people that we are talking with the new president and CEO of the Port of Cleveland, Jeff Epstein. If you want to be a part of this conversation, if you have a question or a comment, you can call 866-578-0903. You can also email us at soi@ideastream.org. We have a call now from Todd in Ward 1. Todd, welcome to the Sound of Ideas. Go ahead.
Stephanie, Jeff, you couldn't have been a better guest for what I wanted to talk about. What is the cost to the taxpayer annually, or at least in the last 5 years, to run the port? And is the Coast Guard in any negotiations that you're aware of to expand their physical structures, their buildings, and their impact to the port? Because the Coast Guard in Cleveland is the headquarters for the 9th District, and that's of all the Great Lakes, and that's important.
Thanks for the question. The port supports itself mostly on our business activities, from running the port, running the dredging facilities, financing fees. We have a small tax levy that brings in about $3 million a year, and that typically is used to help us make infrastructure investments and bring in federal money. We're in the midst right now, for example, of implementing a $95 million clean port grant from the US EPA, where we will be electrifying most of our port equipment, putting solar on the roof of our warehouse. That will help to improve dramatically air quality on Lake Erie and in the community. And we're extremely grateful to the taxpayers of Cuyahoga County for their support. And that $3 million, the number that you shared at the beginning, yields over $4 billion of regional economic impact and supports 23,000 jobs in Northeast Ohio. I am not aware of the Coast Guard's specific expansion, but I know we work very closely with them on harbor safety issues, on ice breaking when that is needed, and on border security issues with our port.
Thank you for the question, Todd. We appreciate it. Let's talk more about that $95 million grant from the Environmental Protection Agency, and that's part of the Clean Ports program. So can you tell us how that makes its way into, how that fits into the port's mission for protection of the environment and sustainability?
Absolutely. The Port of Cleveland has really been a leader in terms of environmental sustainability. On the port, we a number of years ago put in a system to filter all the stormwater that comes through the port and filter it and treat it before it goes back into the lake. We also have a program where that dredge material that comes in, a portion of it is dried out and treated and then is reused for fill in construction projects across Northeast Ohio. So we've got a history of caring for our environment. And this Clean Port grant is really going to be incredible in terms of leveraging solar power to power most of the port. Our cranes, our reach stackers, our forklifts all will be electrified. We're building a new charging station and substation with Cleveland Public Power and those solar panels on the roof. And we expect that is going to make the port cleaner, make the air cleaner, and ultimately with our mission of keeping the water in Great Lakes cleaner too.
It's an important resource, that fresh water.
Absolutely.
That we have right here. We are lucky to have it here in Northeast Ohio.
We absolutely are.
We have an email now from Stephen. Stephen says, I was very disappointed to hear that the American Cruise Lines will not be stopping in Cleveland for their 2026 season. So let's talk a bit more about that. Stephen goes on to ask if there are any planned changes that would make it possible for any cruise ships to stop in Cleveland. So we'll start with that question and then talk a bit more about it.
Yeah, so we had a record year of cruise ships in Cleveland, and I think this is great for Cleveland on so many levels. The idea that 53 ships and 8,600 passengers want to come visit our great city and take advantage of all the incredible assets and visitor destinations here in Cleveland. Again, that was a record year. We expect to have another record year next year. It's unfortunate that American Cruise Lines is not coming. We hope to work something out with them in future years. I think one of the things that we are really looking at and thinking about, along with North Coast Waterfront Development Corporation and the city, is how to make the entry point into Cleveland for cruises even more welcoming. Right now, our customs facility is right at the edge of the port, and you're walking out onto a bus onto the parking lot behind the stadium. And as the plans to redevelop the lakefront continue, we are really looking forward to thinking about visitors to Cleveland being able to come in and have retail and food and coffee and a hotel and other amenities right there to be able to go to a store and buy Cleveland goods right there, because the first impression when they come in, we want to be stronger.
Can you tell us anything about how the decision was made for American Cruise Lines to not stop here with their
It was their decision.
Okay, thanks for sharing that. We have an email now from Jim. Jim has a comment for you. Jim says, Share the River is super grateful to the Port of Cleveland for their support of our annual Blazing Paddles River Festival on Cleveland's historic and scenic Cuyahoga River. We look forward to hosting a fun and festive America 250 Ohio event in July 2026. So what can you tell us about the events and things?
Yeah, I mean, there is an increasing number of events on our river and our lake, and I think that is tremendous. We have a really unique opportunity to embrace our waterfronts, do more, bring more development to the water, bring more people to the water, increase access, and big shout out to the county and the Freshwater Institute for lobbying and pulling everybody together around this tremendous opportunity around water. It was one of the big emphases when I was at City Hall with the mayor around waterfront access. The Bedrock Project, which, by the way, the port helped to finance, bringing the Cavs Clinic Peak Performance Center and kayak access to the river, the downtown lakefront north of the stadium, the Mandel Community Trail stretching east, certainly our Cheers project, which over the course of years will add more recreational amenity. We have an opportunity for our waterfronts to be our differentiating factor in Cleveland and attracting people to use the water and use the lake. And the Blazing Paddles Festival is just one example of ways we as community members can celebrate our waterfronts and our access to fresh water, because it's something that's truly unique about Cleveland. And the other thing I'll add that makes it even more unique is the fact that we have a working river and a working port. And so it's not, it is that nod to our industrial history and present and future that is part of what makes our waterfronts unique.
And of course, Jim, thank you for sending in the email talking about the 250th anniversary of the independence of America there, with the event coming up in July. And we've talked about the Browns Stadium a couple different ways now. So that's going away. The Browns will be moving to Brook Park. So how is the port currently involved in what to do after the stadium is gone?
Yeah, so I am serving on the North Coast Waterfront Development Corporation board that the city has tasked with helping to plan and redevelop the waterfront. It's a great organization. For those of you who haven't heard of it, that is based on national best practices of how to really take on large-scale, complicated developments. So we will be actively involved there. We are a neighbor, and I really also, to that point about our industrial working lake and river, there's an opportunity for the public to get closer to the port, to see what happens in the Port of Cleveland, to think about how that lakefront development will interface with the port and add to the uniqueness of waterfront development. So we're really excited about the development next to us, looking forward to being involved and supportive, both from a planning standpoint, potentially a financing standpoint, and as a neighbor.
What about the $100 million coming in from the Haslams? Does the port have any say in how that money is used in the redevelopment?
Ultimately, the city and the North Coast Waterfront Development Corporation will be involved in that, but we are very much looking forward to partnering. I think that money will be really critical to advancing development on the water.
Can you give us any kind of an idea? Are there any priorities that are on your mind that you think would be the best use of that space?
I think activities that bring more people down to the water, whether it is venues for events, whether it is restaurants, whether it is recreation. The city did a really incredible master plan for the lakefront a couple years ago. And as you look at some of the elements of that, the porches and the idea of modeling front porches where people can just hang on a lakefront, a fishing pier, a playground, sports courts, all of that active recreational activity. But I also think it's a tremendous opportunity for people who want to live on the water, who want to stay on the water in a hotel, who want to come to the water for an event. I think there's going to be plenty of great uses for that space.
Okay. Jeff Epstein, the new president and CEO of the Port of Cleveland, want to thank you for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Great to be here.
All right. That's all the time we have for this conversation. If you would like to get the last word on today's topics, you can send an email to soi@ideastream.org. You can also find us on Instagram. We're at The Sound of Ideas. Yesterday on The Sound of Ideas, we talked to doctors and patients about perimenopause and menopause and the lack of information that still surrounds this stage of life for women. Kit wrote in my 20s and 30s, I suffered with terrible endometriosis and experienced menopause symptoms due to the hormonal treatment. After it finally subsided and when in my 40s, I had asymptomatic menopause. One month I had a period, and the next month I didn't, and never again. It was like someone just flipped a switch. Estrogen was never recommended by my doctor because I was so symptom-free, but unfortunately I ended up developing osteoporosis, a silent disease because of the lack of estrogen. I wish now that I had taken it. Kit, thank you very much for sharing your experience with us. We appreciate it. Tomorrow on The Sound of Ideas, we'll talk to Cleveland Metropolitan School District CEO Warren Morgan about the district's plans to consolidate school buildings. Plus, we'll have our final installment of the menu for 2025, and we'll look back at the biggest food news from the past year with Cleveland Magazine. If you missed any part of today's show, you can listen to The Sound of Ideas wherever you get your podcasts, and you can watch the show on the IdeaStream Public Media YouTube page. You can also hear a rebroadcast tonight at 9 on 89.7 WKSU. I'm Stephanie Haney. Thank you for keeping the conversation going. We'll see you back here tomorrow on The Sound of Ideas.